next have the keynote address by Mr. Daren Tang, the Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. Mr. Daren Tang is the first Singaporean head of a UN agency, taking office as the Director General of WIPO on 1st October 2020 for a 6-year term. Prior to WIPO, Daren was appointed Chief Executive of the IPOS, Intellectual Property Office of Singapore, in 2015. He was previously Deputy Chief Executive of IPOS and in charge of the registries cluster and oversaw the operations of the registries of patents, trademarks, and designs, as well as Singapore's intellectual property policy and legal regime. Daren also represented Singapore in a number of international IP and free trade agreement negotiations. Prior to joining IPOS, Mr. Daren Tang was a senior state counsel with the International Affairs Division of the Attorney General's Chambers, where he advised the Singapore government on a number of very complex international law issues. Daren graduated from NUS in 1997 and later obtained an LLM with distinction from Georgetown University, where he was also a fellow of the Institute of International Economic Law. He also attended the Advanced Management Program, AMP, at Harvard Business School in 2013. NUS Law and EPCA are indeed delighted and most honored to welcome you, Daren, today to our conference and to deliver the keynote address. Over to you, Daren.
Thank you so much, David. Good morning from Geneva and warm greetings to all of you participating from around the world. It's a great pleasure to be with you today and to speak at my alma mater, though I'm always a bit jealous when I talk about my alma mater because I was at the Cambridge campus, which was obviously not as beautiful as the campus that you have now at the law schools. But thank you, David, for inviting me to address this conference, and congratulations to the Asia Pacific Corporate Association for attracting such a distinguished lineup of speakers and papers. Your theme this year, the age of disruption, is both timely and timeless. It's timely because it seems to appropriately capture this moment in our history, the lingering effects of the pandemic, the drastic rise in interest rates and inflation, and the geopolitical stresses that the country and region, Singapore and Southeast Asia, always feels very keenly. And of course, the impact of climate change, with COP27 unfolding now even as we speak. And yet, as you look at the last 130 years since the founding of the Berne Convention, the corporate system has gone through almost an never-ending series of disruptions and even upheavals. Global wars, both hot and cold, and a constant series of technology disruptions. So that's why I mean by it's also, in a way, disruption has been timeless and part of the copyright ecosystem since its founding. So I think one must not over-despair or be overwhelmed, or one must also not be indifferent or oblivious, but work together as a community to look at the issues that we need to look at and to address them together. So occasions like this, which bring people together, are always welcome and always supported by us at WIPO. But let me start by sharing with everyone some broad and global perspectives on intellectual property from my vantage point. And two major trends are emerging when we look at IP data, and of course, also when I speak to people from around the world, not just at the political leadership level, but also those who are innovating and creating on the ground. First, IP is moving from the economic periphery to the center in more and more countries in the world, and this has been accelerated by the pandemic. Worldwide trademark volumes have doubled since 2015, with patent and design filings up around 15% over the same period. And of course, despite, or maybe because of the disruptions presented by the pandemic, the number of IP applications filed globally and with WIPO's international registries has not just grown as per normal, but it's accelerated in the last 2 years. So, for example, trademark filings increased by 15% last year before WIPO, and design filings increased by 21%. So these are huge figures above the usual 3 to 5% growth. Second, and quite unnoticed by many, the geography of IP has changed over the last 2 decades. IP activity, simply put, is no longer centered in Europe and North America, but increasingly in other parts of the world. 10 years ago, 5 in 10 IP filings originated from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Last year, this figure stands at 7 in 10 across all types of IP. And interestingly, I wanted to share with you some statistics for domestic trademark filings. Number 1 in the world, number 2, no surprises there, China and the US. But number 3 was Iran at 525,000 trademark applications, surpassing the EU, which was at 438,000. And with India coming in at number 5, right, at 425,000. So you see what I mean by this data, and the statistics show that there's been a shift in the geography of IP, and more countries around the world are beginning to become engines of IP growth as well. These shifts go beyond the realms of patents, trademarks, and designs. And it also extends to copyright, which may be less quantifiable because it's often not it's not registrable, but also moving in a very similar direction. And let me share 3 examples to demonstrate this. First, copyright is increasingly and directly linked to economic sectors of growing strategic importance to countries. Fast-moving industries from AI to esports have clear copyright dimensions. I think just last week, the European Commission supported the move to give a lot more sponsorship to esports. And indeed, in many cases, such as in the metaverse, IP rights are integral to establishing and upholding the legal framework on which the sector will stand. And it's worth taking a moment to consider what numbers are involved here. Estimates suggest that AI could contribute US $15 trillion to the global economy by 2030, and that global esports revenue could reach almost $6 billion by the same benchmark 2030. The metaverse market size is predicted to expand by 40% each year for the next 5 years. So in short, your areas of specialization are helping to drive many of the high growth industries of the future. Second, the unprecedented speed of technological change is creating new opportunities for creators around the world. Prior to the streaming revolution, it was estimated that the number of records released in the US, the world's largest music market, was around 35,000 a year. Now, the most popular streaming services receive more than 1 million recordings a month, giving rise to creators that stand to receive some form of remuneration using online platforms. And artists around the world are benefiting from the US $25 billion market in NFTs. For example, the Nigerian digital artist Osinachi sold a work for US $80,000 last year and became the first African NFT artist to be featured at the Christie's auction in London. So while the long-run sustainability of this market is, of course, an open question, the revenue streams involved can contribute to the livelihoods of artists and creators, including in developing countries. Third, the economic importance of the creative industries continues to grow across the world. In Latin America, for example, the orange economy has become a byword for economic development. In Colombia, for instance, where the term originated, employment in the creative sectors increased by 16% in the 5 years prior to the pandemic. Last month, I had the chance to visit the Center of Technological Revolution on Creative Industries in Santiago, which is actually a very unique incubation hub for what they call creative tech. It brings together those at the forefront of digital technologies, creators, musicians, and other stakeholders in Chile's ecosystem. And over a 10-year period, right, aims to put help and support high growth sectors in that country and in the region, such as video games, virtual reality, and animation, on the same footing as other R&D intensive sectors. Apart from the fact that this is interesting, I've yet to see this in a developed country where they are looking at incubation for creative technologies. So it's a sign of a dynamism that these activities are now increasingly driven by the so-called global south. These changes will, of course, pose challenges to the copyright system. And one of the core missions of WIPO is to help member states understand and evolve policy and legislation to address them. Given that I'm addressing a room full of law professors and academics, I will focus a little bit on the legal framework and share what have been some of the principles we apply in helping member states to approach these challenges. First, the legal framework must remain fair and balanced between rights holders and users. This is extremely complex, of course. And with modern forms of communication, member states are increasingly torn between different and increasingly vocal interest groups. In addition, they have to grapple with the emergence of large and influential digital platforms that did not exist even a decade ago. So often in copyright, there's no black and white, but shades of gray and much more than 50. Second, we encourage member states to ensure that rights are clear and transparent. Why? Because copyright is probably the one IP right that's the most pervasive in our modern society, because everyone's either consuming or uploading content. Everyone has a way, has a connection and touch point in the copyright system on a daily basis, whether it's through music or art or many, many other forms of creative expression. And so if we do not articulate our laws in a way that as many people as possible can understand it, then the public debates and discussions around it will be obscured. And more importantly, or maybe equally importantly, the actors in the copyright system, our people, will not know how to go about how to order their creative lives. And third, because of the heavy influence of technology, it is probably tempting sometimes to intervene on the basis of a particular technology and to intervene early. But sometimes, though, discretion is the better part of valor, and legislative responses have to be thought through carefully and to address things at the systemic level rather than at the symptomatic level. Now, while many of you may be most familiar with WIPO's role as a norm and standard setting agency, increasingly the work of WIPO is focused on creating impact on the ground. Why is this so? Because it is critical that the IP community works to make IP relatable, understandable, and impactful in a practical way, so that people understand that it works and it can work for them, rather than just be something so specialized or technical that's best left to experts and specialists. So let me share with you some examples of what work we are doing in this direction. One of the fastest growing treaties in the WIPO stable is the Marrakesh Treaty. But joining a treaty does not necessarily mean that it's always implemented on the ground in a way that helps those who are supposed to benefit from it. This is why we also started the Accessible Books Consortium, or ABC, which works with NGOs on the ground in countries that have joined the Marrakesh Treaty to ensure that books in accessible formats are being created to support those who need these books. And thanks to this service, we now have almost 800,000 books in the ABC portfolio. And we hope that people who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled can now access these books in more than 80 languages. And I think this is just an example of what we can do when we work beyond the legislative framework to partner with private and public sectors and civil society to be able to deliver results on the ground. Another project I'd like to share with you is called WIPO for Creators, which is a platform where musicians will be able to support and educate and guide fellow musicians in understanding and using IP from a livelihood perspective. And we also have this other project that we call WIPO Connect that helps CMOs to digitalize, and especially CMOs in developing countries, which don't have the resources always to use technology, right, in order to be more efficient, in order to serve the creators and the public. And what has happened is that using our platform, we have helped CMOs in developing countries to facilitate the distribution of royalties, over 12 million Swiss francs this year, up 200% from the previous year. And beyond these, we are developing new areas of work in looking at policies relating to IP in sports and copyright in the digital era. And we also continue to explore other novel ways to work with partners around the world. Last week, for example, we launched Patent X, a groundbreaking new course with Harvard Law School that explores all aspects of the relationship between patent law and global health. Patent X is a response to the increasing public and professional interest we're seeing in the area. And perhaps given the themes that we're considering today, it is time to look at a Copyright X course as well. So David, something for your consideration. So ladies and gentlemen, copyright has been riding disruptive waves for a long time. AI, blockchain, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, these are just the latest manifestations of a trend that stretches back a long time. When Victor Hugo and Charles Dickens were pushing member states to finalize the Berne Convention 130 years ago, the worry at that time was unauthorized reproduction sparked by the rise of the printing press. And then, of course, then came a deluge of other innovations, player panels, the radio, cable TV, photocopiers, VCRs, internet downloads, and streaming platforms. So if any sector knows how to navigate emerging technologies, it is this sector, it is a copyright community. And just as it's done in the past, the academic community that you represent has a key role to play in informing debate and developing new and forward-looking solutions. Indeed, in many ways, the future of copyright begins at conferences like this, open and collaborative forums where ideas can be presented, tested, and discussed. This is why it's such a pleasure to be with you today and to participate in what I'm sure will be a stimulating conversation to follow. Disruption can be unsettling, but it's often the price of progress. And we are confident that in the copyright system, where you have both a timely and timeless way of approaching disruption, the conversations will lead to new ways of thinking about copyright and new ways of serving the people in our world. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the Q&A session.